Hi everyone. In this section, we're going to talk about human impacts on wetlands and mangroves, specifically what wetlands are, some of the ecosystem services they provide, and then some threats to ecosystems, specifically anthropogenic threats. So what are wetlands? Wetlands are areas with soil that's submerged or saturated in water for at least part of the year, but remains shallow enough for emergent plants. So a lot of plant life found in wetlands is specific to wetlands and aren't found anywhere else. Wetland plants have adapted to living with roots that are submerged in standing water. So oftentimes with agricultural crops, we find that when we flood the field, we can get a lot of root rot in our agricultural crops, but the plants in wetlands don't experience that same thing because their root systems have adapted to being submerged in water. So these are cattails, lily pads, reeds, and other plants such as those. Some ecosystem services provided by wetlands. So this goes all the way back to Unit 2, I believe. So we have provisioning services provided by wetlands. So these wetlands provide plants and animals that we consume as food. Wetlands provide regulating services. So they provide groundwater recharge. So wetlands allow water to slowly seep back into the soil, which replenishes aquifers. And then we can use these recharged aquifers as drinking water or to water our agricultural fields. They also help absorb flood water, which we'll find on the next slide. When we develop on wetlands, we tend to see more flooding of those areas because we're removing that regulating service, which provides flood control. And wetlands also provide carbon dioxide sequestration. So a lot of the all of the plants in wetlands will intake CO2 through photosynthesis, which will help to mitigate climate change. Some supporting ecosystem services, a lot of the plants found in wetlands will actually help filter the water. So their roots will either filter out the pollutants or hang on to the pollutants, which makes our drinking water cleaner. They are great habitats for pollinators. So a lot of the plant life, especially flowers, are habitats for pollinators such as bees and birds. And then as an added bonus, those organisms will then later help pollinate agricultural fields, which then monetarily benefits farmers and helps bolster the economy. So we kind of have this like trickle down effect with the pollinator habitat supporting service provided by wetlands. Wetlands also help with nutrient cycling. So they will take dead organic matter and help break it down to be recycled within that ecosystem. And this can even begin the formation of peat, which, as we've talked about before, can be used as a fuel source, especially in less developed nations. And wetlands can also provide pest control. So organisms such as spiders and frogs tend to thrive in wetland ecosystems, and those spiders and frogs and other organisms as well tend to eat pests such as mosquitoes or other insects. This also helps to reduce the amount of pests that would then make their way to our agricultural fields, which would then damage our crops. So again, it allows us to monetarily benefit from the pest control because less of our crops are being damaged, which means those farmers can make more money, which again bolsters the economy. Wetlands also provide cultural services, so they're a great spot for tourism, which generates revenue. They typically require people to get fishing license, which costs money in order to be able to go and fish in wetlands. They are great spots for camping, so they will charge camping fees in order to be able to camp on the wetland property or wetland area, I should say. And they are a great place for education and medical research. Some threats to wetlands, specifically anthropogenic. So we can, as humans, introduce nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, which can lead to eutrophication. We can introduce more sediment or have sedimentation, which can impact the temperature of the water as well as turbidity. We can introduce motor oil from our vehicles into wetlands. We can introduce pesticides, and we can introduce endocrine disruptors, which is often from medications that that we take, which are then excreted out through our urine and make their way to the aquatic ecosystems like wetlands. Development. So we have actually, as humans, started developing on wetland soil. So the wetlands end up getting filled in or drained to be developed into homes, parking lots, stores, or agricultural land. The benefit of doing that, especially for agricultural land, is that soil underneath the wetland tends to be super rich because of its nutrient recycling abilities. However, when we develop on wetland, water diversion upstream for flood control, agricultural, or drinking water can reduce the water flow downstream and dry up the wetlands, which is kind of what we see happening in the Everglades. Dam construction for flood control or hydroelectricity reduces water and sediment flow to our wetlands as well. And then overfishing. So we've talked about aquaculture and sustainable fishing practices. So when we overfish our wetlands, this disrupts the food web of the wetlands. So we've talked about fishing down the food chain. So it ends up decreasing the carnivorous fish at the top of the food chain, which will then increase the prey species lower down on that food chain, and kind of has this like compounding effect as we make our way down the food chain and continue overfishing the species within the wetlands. On this slide, we have some solutions to watershed pollutants. We've talked about a lot of these throughout the year already. I will let you read this on your own and jog your memory. Some things that will be coming up though: septic tank upgrades we'll talk about, nutrient removal and biological nutrient removal we will talk about, but everything else we should have already talked about at some point this year. So go ahead and review that on your own. And then this infographic talks about the benefits of mangroves as well as threats to mangroves. So I will not read this to you. You can peruse this on your own as well. And that is all for this section. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know.